Coming back at you again. Let's get in here with symbolisms of Freemasonry. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all right?
Preface. Of the various modes of communicating instruction to the uninformed, the Masonic student is particularly interested in two, namely, the instruction by legends and that by symbols. It is to these two, almost exclusively, that he is indebted for all that he knows, and for all that he can know, of the philosophic system which is taught in the institution. All its mysteries and its dogmas, which constitute its philosophy, are entrusted for communication to the neophyte, sometimes to one, sometimes to the other of these two methods of instruction, and sometimes to both of them combined. The Freemason has no way of reaching any of the esoteric teachings of the order except through the medium of a legend or a symbol. A legend differs from an historical narrative only in this, that it is without documentary evidence of authenticity. It is the offspring solely of tradition. Its details may be true in part or in whole. There may be no internal evidence to the contrary, or there may be internal evidence that they are altogether false. But neither the possibility of truth in the one case, nor the certainty of falsehood in can remove the traditional narrative from the class of legends. It is a legend simply because it rests on no written foundation. It is oral, and therefore legendary. In grave problems of history, such as the establishment of empires, the discovery and settlement of countries, or the rise and fall of dynasties, the knowledge of the truth or falsity of the legendary narrative will be of importance, because the value of history is impaired by the imputation of doubt. But it is not so in Freemasonry. Here there need be no absolute question of the truth or falsity of the legend. The object of the Masonic legends is not to establish historical facts, but to convey philosophical doctrines. They are a method by which esoteric instruction is communicated, and the student accepts them with reference to nothing else except their positive use and meaning as developing Masonic dogmas. Take, for instance, the Haramak legend of the third degree. Of what importance is it to the disciple of Masonry whether it be true or false? All that he wants to know is its internal signification, and when he learns that it is intended to illustrate the doctrine of the immortality of the soul, he is content with that interpretation, and he does not deem it necessary, except as a matter of curious or antiquarian inquiry, to investigate its historical accuracy, or to reconcile any of its apparent contradictions. So of the lost keystone, so of the second temple, so of the hidden ark, these are to him legendary narratives, which, like the casket, would be of no value were it not for the precious jewel contained within. Each of these legends is the expression of a philosophical idea. But there is another method of Masonic instruction, and that is by symbols. No science is more ancient than that of symbolism. At one time, nearly all the learning of the world was conveyed in symbols. And although modern philosophy now deals only in abstract propositions, Freemasonry still cleaves to the ancient method, and has preserved it in its primitive importance as a means of communicating knowledge. According to the derivation of the word from the Greek, to symbolize signifies to compare one thing with another. Hence a symbol is the expression of an idea that has been derived from the comparison or contrast of some object with a moral conception or attribute. Thus we say that the plum is a symbol of rectitude of conduct. The physical qualities of the plum are here compared or contrasted with the moral conception of virtue, or rectitude. Then to the speculative Mason it becomes, after he has been taught its symbolic meaning, the visible expression of the idea of moral uprightness. But although there are these two modes of instruction in Freemasonry, by legends and by symbols, there really is no radical difference between the two methods. The symbol is a visible, and the legend an audible representation of some contrasted idea of some moral conception produced from a comparison. Both the legend and the symbol relate to dogmas of a deep religious character. Both of them convey moral sentiments in the same peculiar method, and both of them are designed by this method to illustrate the philosophy of speculative Masonry. To investigate the recondite meaning of these legends and symbols, and to elicit from them the moral and philosophical lessons which they were intended to teach, is to withdraw the veil with which ignorance and indifference seek to conceal the true philosophy of Freemasonry. To study the symbolism of Masonry is the only way to investigate its philosophy. This is the portal of its temple, through which alone we can gain access to the Sacellum where its operata are concealed. Its philosophy is engaged in the consideration of propositions relating to God and man, to the present and the future life. Its science is the symbolism by which these propositions are presented to the mind. The work now offered to the public is an effort to develop and explain this philosophy and science. It will show that there are in Freemasonry the germ of profound speculation. If it does not interest the learned, it may instruct the ignorant. If so, I shall not regret the labor and research that have been bestowed upon its composition. Albert G. Mackey, M.D. Charleston, South Carolina, February 22, 1869. The Symbolism of Freemasonry. By Albert G. Mackey. 1882. Any inquiry into the symbolism and philosophy of Freemasonry must necessarily be preceded by a brief investigation of the origin and history of the institution. Ancient and universal as it is, whence did it arise? What were the accidents connected with its birth? From what kindred or similar association did it spring? Or was it original and autochthonic, independent, in its inception, of any external influences, and unconnected with any other institution? These are questions which an intelligent investigator will be disposed to propound in the very commencement of the inquiry, and they are questions which must be distinctly answered before he can be expected to comprehend its true character as a symbolic institution. He must know something of its antecedents, before he can appreciate its character. But he who expects to arrive at a satisfactory solution of this inquiry must first, as a preliminary absolutely necessary to success, release himself from the influence of an error into which novices in Masonic philosophy are too apt to fall. He must not confound the doctrine of Freemasonry with its outward and extrinsic form. He must not suppose that certain usages and ceremonies, which exist at this day, but which, even now, are subject to extensive variations in different countries, constitute the sum and substance of Freemasonry. Prudent antiquity, says Lord Coke, did for more solemnity and better memory and observation of that which is to be done, express substances under ceremonies. But it must be always remembered that the ceremony is not the substance. It is but the outer garment which covers and perhaps adorns it, as clothing does the human figure. But divest man of that outward apparel, and you still have the microcosm, the wondrous creation, with all his nerves, and bones, and muscles, and, above all, with his brain, and thoughts, and feelings. And so take from Masonry these external ceremonies, and you still have remaining its philosophy and science. These have, of course, always continued the same, while the ceremonies have varied in different ages, and still vary in different countries. The definition of Freemasonry that it is a science of morality, veiled in allegory, and illustrated by symbols, has been so often quoted, that, were it not for its beauty, it would become wearisome. But this definition contains the exact principle that has just been enunciated. Freemasonry is a science, a philosophy, a system of doctrines which is taught, in a manner peculiar to itself, by allegories and symbols. This is its internal character. Its ceremonies are external additions, we affect not its substance. Now, when we are about to institute an inquiry into the origin of Freemasonry, it is of this peculiar sister philosophy that we are to inquire, and not of the ceremonies which have been foisted on it. If we pursue any other course we shall assuredly fall into error. Thus, if we seek the origin and first beginning of the Masonic philosophy, we must go away back into the ages of remote antiquity, when we shall find this beginning in the bosom of kindred association.
I hate when I try to screen share. It seems like I always have problems with the audio. So I'm just gonna pull out my Bluetooth here. Hold on a minute. I need to trying to connect this my little Wi-Fi device. I don't know what's going on with it. Oh well, it doesn't matter.
Harmonies are external additions, which affect not its substance. Now, when we are about to institute
There
an
it is.
inquiry into the origin of Freemasonry, then, I contend that the philosophy of Freemasonry is engaged in the contemplation of the divine and human character, of God as one eternal, self-existent being, in contradiction to the mythology of the ancient peoples, which was burdened with a multitude of gods and goddesses, of demigods and heroes, of man as an immortal being, preparing in the present life for an eternal future, in like contradiction to the ancient philosophy, which circumscribed the existence of man to the present life. These two doctrines, then, of the unity of God and the immortality of the soul, constitute the philosophy of Freemasonry. When we wish to define it succinctly, we say that it is an ancient system of philosophy which teaches these two dogmas. And hence, if, amid the intellectual darkness and debasement of the old polytheistic religions, we find interspersed here and there, in all ages, certain institutions or associations which taught these truths, and that, in a particular way, allegorically and symbolically, then we have a right to say that such institutions or associations were the incunabula, the predecessors of the Masonic institution as it now exists. With these preliminary remarks, the reader will be enabled to enter upon the consideration of that theory of the origin of Freemasonry which I advance in the following propositions. 1. In the first place, I contend that in the very earliest ages of the world there were existent certain truths of vast importance to the welfare and happiness of humanity, which had been communicated, no matter how, but, most probably, by direct inspiration from God to man. 2. These truths principally consisted in the abstract propositions of the unity of God and the immortality of the soul. Of the truth of these two propositions there cannot be a reasonable doubt. The belief in these truths is a necessary consequence of that religious sentiment, which has always formed an essential feature of human nature. Man is, emphatically, and in distinction from all other creatures, a religious animal. Gross commences his interesting work on the heathen religion in its popular and symbolical development by the statement that one of the most remarkable phenomena of the human race is the universal existence of religious ideas, a belief in something supernatural and divine, and a worship corresponding to it. As nature had implanted the religious sentiment, the same nature must have directed it in a proper channel. The belief and the worship must at first have been as pure as the fountain whence they flowed, although, in subsequent times, and before the advent of Christian light, they may both have been corrupted by the influence of the priests and the poets over an ignorant and superstitious people. The first and second propositions of my theory refer only to that primeval period which was antecedent to these corruptions, of which I shall hereafter speak. 3. These truths of God and immortality were most probably handed down through the line of patriarchs of the race of Seth, but were, at all events, known to Noah, and were by him communicated to his immediate descendants. 4. In consequence of this communication, the true worship of God continued, for some time after the subsidence of the deluge, to be cultivated by the Nochidae, the Noachites, or the descendants of Noah. 5. At a subsequent period, no matter when, but the biblical record places it at the attempted building of the Tower of Babel, there was a secession of a large number of the human race from the Noachites. 6. These seceders rapidly lost sight of the divine truths which had been communicated to them from their common ancestor, and fell into the most grievous theological errors, corrupting the purity of the worship and the orthodoxy of the religious faith which they had primarily received. 7. These truths were preserved in their integrity by but a very few in the patriarchal line, while still fewer were enabled to retain only dim and glimmering portions of the true light. 8. The first class was confined to the direct descendants of Noah, and the second was to be found among the priests and philosophers, and, perhaps, still later, among the poets of the heathen nations, and among those whom they initiated into the secrets of these truths. Of the prevalence of these religious truths among the patriarchal descendants of Noah, we have ample evidence in the sacred records. As to their existence among a body of learned heathens, we have the testimony of many intelligent writers who have devoted their energies to this subject. Thus the learned Grote, in his History of Greece, says, "The allegorical interpretation of the myths has been, by several learned investigators, especially by Creusa, connected with the hypothesis of an ancient and highly instructed body."
What you talking about, baby girl? What's up, Charles? Baby girl, I missed you. I hope everybody's doing well today. Y'all know that we kind of chill. I really ain't been doing the previous today.
Priests, having their origin either in Egypt or in the East, and communicating to the rude and barbarous Greeks religious, physical, and historical knowledge, under the veil of symbols. What is here said only of the Greeks is equally applicable to every other intellectual nation of antiquity. 9. The system or doctrine of the former class has been called by Masonic writers the pure or primitive Freemasonry of antiquity, and that of the latter class the spurious Freemasonry of the same period. These terms were first used, if I mistake not, by Dr. Oliver, and are intended to refer the word pure to the doctrines taught by the descendants of Noah in the Jewish line, and the word spurious to his descendants in the heathen or Gentile line. 10. The masses of the people, among the Gentiles especially, were totally unacquainted with this divine truth, which was the foundation stone of both species of Freemasonry, the pure and the spurious, and were deeply immersed in the errors and falsities of heathen belief and worship. 11. These errors of the heathen religions were not the voluntary inventions of the peoples who cultivated them, but were gradual and almost unavoidable corruptions of the truths which had been at first taught by Noah, and, indeed, so palpable are these corruptions, that they can be readily detected and traced to the original form from which, however much they might vary among different peoples, they had, at one time or another, deviated. Thus, in the life and achievements of Bacchus or Dionysus, we find the travestied counterpart of the career of Moses, and in the name of Vulcan, the blacksmith god, we evidently see an etymological corruption of the appellation of Tubal-Cain, the first artificer in metals. For Vulcan is but a modified form of Baal-Cain, the god Cain. 12. But those among the masses, and there were some who were made acquainted with the truth, received their knowledge by means of an initiation into certain sacred mysteries, in the bosom of which it was concealed from the public gaze. 13. These mysteries existed in every country of heathendom, in each under a different name, and to some extent under a different form, but always and everywhere with the same design of inculcating, by allegorical and symbolic teachings, the great Masonic doctrines of the unity of God and the immortality of the soul. This is an important proposition, and the fact which it enunciates must never be lost sight of in any inquiry into the origin of Freemasonry, for the pagan mysteries were to the spurious Freemasonry of antiquity precisely what the Masters' Lodges are to the Freemasonry of the present day. It is needless to offer any proof of their existence, since this is admitted and continually referred to by all historians, ancient and modern, and to discuss minutely their character and organization would occupy a distinct treatise. The Baron de Sainte Croix has written 2 large volumes on the subject, and yet left it unexhausted. 14. These two divisions of the Masonic institution, which were defined in the 9th proposition, namely, the pure or primitive Freemasonry among the Jewish descendants of the patriarchs, who are called, by way of distinction, the Noachites, or descendants of Noah, because they had not forgotten nor abandoned the teachings of their great ancestor, and the spurious Freemasonry practiced among the pagan nations, flowed down the stream of time in parallel currents, often near together, but never commingling. 15. But these two currents were not always to be kept apart, for, springing, in the long anterior ages, from one common fountain, that ancient priesthood of whom I have already spoken in the 8th proposition, and then dividing into the pure and spurious Freemasonry of antiquity, and remaining separated for centuries upon centuries, they at length met at the building of the great Temple of Jerusalem, and were united, in the instance of the Israelites under King Solomon, and the Tyrians under Hiram, king of Tyre, and Hiram of Eph. The spurious Freemasonry, it is true, did not then and there cease to exist. On the contrary, it lasted for centuries subsequent to this period, for it was not until long after, and in the reign of the Emperor Theodosius, that the pagan mysteries were finally and totally abolished. But by the union of the Jewish or pure Freemasons and the Tyrian or spurious Freemasons of Jerusalem, there was a mutual infusion of their respective doctrines and ceremonies, which eventually terminated in the abolition of the two distinctive systems and the establishment of a new one, that may be considered as the immediate prototype of the present institution. Hence many Masonic students, going no farther back in their investigations than the facts announced in this 15th proposition, are content to find the origin of Freemasonry at the Temple of Solomon. But if my theory be correct, the truth is that it there received, not its birth, but only a new modification of its character. The legend of the 3rd degree, the Golden Legend, the Legenda Aurea of Masonry, was there adopted by pure Freemasonry, which before had no such legend, from spurious Freemasonry. But the legend had existed under other names and forms, in all the mysteries, for ages before. The doctrine of immortality, which had hitherto been taught by the Noachites simply as an abstract proposition, was thenceforth to be inculcated by a symbolic lesson. The symbol of Hiram the Builder was to become forever after the distinctive feature of Freemasonry. 16. But another important modification was effected in the Masonic system at the building of the temple. Previous to the union which then took place, the pure Freemasonry of the Noachites had always been speculative, but resembled the present organization in no other way than in the cultivation of the same abstract principles of divine truth. 17. The Tyrians, on the contrary,
How about smacking that damn light button?
were architects by profession, and, as their leaders were disciples of the school of the spurious Freemasonry, they, for the first time, at the Temple of Solomon, when they united with their Jewish contemporaries, infused into the speculative science, which was practiced by the latter, the elements of an operative art. 18. Therefore the system continued thenceforward, for ages, to present the commingled elements of operative and speculative masonry. We see this in the Collegia Fabrorum, or colleges of artificers, first established at Rome by Numa, and which were certainly of a Masonic form in their organization, in the Jewish sect of the Essenes, who wrought as well as prayed, and who are claimed to have been the descendants of the temple builders, and also, and still more prominently, in the traveling Freemasons of the Middle Ages, who identify themselves by their very name with their modern successors, and whose societies were composed of learned men who thought and wrote, and of workmen who labored and built. And so for a long time Freemasonry continued to be both operative and speculative. 19. But another change was to be effected in the institution to make it precisely what it now is, and, therefore, at a very recent period, comparatively speaking, the operative feature was abandoned, and Freemasonry became wholly speculative. The exact time of this change is not left to conjecture. It took place in the reign of Queen Anne of England in the beginning of the 18th century. Preston gives us the very words of the decree which established this change, for he says that at that time it was agreed to that the privilege. Me and Charles are right. I ain't got no problem with him. I don't know why you blocked him. I'm blocked Charles. I ain't got no people in him good. of Masonry should no longer be restricted to operative Masons, but extend to men of various professions, provided they were regularly approved and initiated into the order. The 19 propositions here announced contain a brief but succinct view of the progress of Freemasonry from its origin in the early ages of the world, simply as a system of religious philosophy, through all the modifications to which it was submitted in the Jewish and Gentile races, until at length it was developed in its present perfected form. During all this time it preserved unchangeably certain features that may hence be considered as its specific characteristics, by which it has always been distinguished from every other contemporaneous association, however such association may have simulated it in outward form. These characteristics are, first, the doctrines which it has constantly taught, namely, that of the unity of God and that of the immortality of the soul, and, secondly, the manner in which these doctrines have been taught, namely, by symbols and allegories. Taking these characteristics as the exponents of what Freemasonry is, we cannot help arriving at the conclusion that the speculative Masonry of the present day exhibits abundant evidence of the identity of its origin with the spurious Freemasonry of the ante-Solomonic period, both systems coming from the same pure source, but the one always preserving, and the other continually corrupting, the purity of the common fountain. This is also the necessary conclusion as a corollary from the propositions advanced in this essay. There is also abundant evidence in the history, of which these propositions are but a meagre outline, that a manifest influence was exerted on the pure or primitive Freemasonry of the Noachites by the Tyrian branch of the spurious system, in the symbols, myths, and legends which the former received from the latter, but which it so modified and interpreted as to make them consistent with its own religious system. One thing, at least, is incapable of refutation, and that is, that we are indebted to the Tyrian Masons for the introduction of the symbol of Hiram Aviv. The idea of the symbol, although modified by the Jewish Masons, is not Jewish in its inception. It was evidently borrowed from the pagan mysteries, where Bacchus, Adonis, Proserpine, and a host of other apotheosized beings play the same role that Hiram does in the Masonic mysteries. And lastly, we find in the technical terms of Masonry, in its working tools, in the names of its grades, and in a large majority of its symbols, ample testimony of the strong infusion into its religious philosophy of the elements of an operative art. And history again explains this fact by referring to the connection of the institution with the Dionysiac fraternity of artificers, who were engaged in building the Temple of Solomon, with the workmen's colleges of Numa, and with the traveling Freemasons of the Middle Ages, who constructed all the great buildings of that period. These 19 propositions, which have been submitted in the present essay, constitute a brief summary or outline of a theory of the true origin of Freemasonry, which long and patient investigation has led me to adopt. To attempt to prove the truth of each of these propositions in its order by logical demonstration, or by historical evidence, would involve the writing of an elaborate treatise. They are now offered simply as suggestions on which the Masonic student may ponder. They are but intended as guideposts, which may direct him in his journey should he undertake the pleasant although difficult task of instituting an inquiry into the origin and progress of Freemasonry from its birth to its present state of full-grown manhood. But even in this abridged form they are absolutely necessary as preliminary to any true understanding of the symbolism of Freemasonry. The Noachide. I proceed, then, to inquire into the historical origin of Freemasonry, as a necessary introduction to any inquiry into the character of its symbolism. To do this, with any expectation of rendering justice to the subject, it is evident.
32 degree. Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. Master of Royal Secret. The occult science of the ancient Magi was concealed under the shadows of the ancient mysteries. It was imperfectly revealed, or rather disfigured by the Gnostics. It is guessed at under the obscurities that cover the pretended crimes of the Templars, and it is found enveloped in enigmas that seem impenetrable in the rites of the highest Masonry. Magism was the science of Abraham and Orpheus, of Confucius and Zoroaster. It was the dogmas of this science that were engraven on the tables of stone by Hanok and Trismegistus. Moses purified and revealed them, for that is the meaning of the word reveal. He covered them with a new veil when he made of the Holy Kabbalah the exclusive heritage of the people of Israel and the inviolable secret of its priests. The mysteries of Thebes and Eleusis preserved among the nations some symbols of it, already altered, and the mysterious key whereof was lost among the instruments of an ever-growing superstition. Jerusalem, the murderess of her prophets, and so often prostituted to the false gods of the Syrians and Babylonians, had at length in its turn lost the holy word, when a prophet announced to the Magi by the consecrated star of initiation, came to rend asunder the worn veil of the old temple, in order to give the church a new tissue of legends and symbols, that still and ever conceals from the profane, and ever preserves to the elect the same truths. It was the remembrance of this scientific and religious absolute, of this doctrine that is summed up in a word, of this word, in fine, alternately lost and found again, that was transmitted to the elect of all the ancient initiations. It was this same remembrance, preserved, or perhaps profaned in the celebrated order of the Templars, that became for all the secret associations, of the Rose Croix, of the Illuminati, and of the Hermetic Freemasons, the reason of their strange rites, of their signs more or less conventional, and, above all, of their mutual devotedness and of their power. The Gnostics caused the gnosis to be prescribed by the Christians, and the official sanctuary was closed against the high initiation. Thus the hierarchy of knowledge was compromitted by the violences of usurping ignorance, and the disorders of the sanctuary are reproduced in the state, for always, willingly or unwillingly, the king is sustained by the priest, and it is from the eternal sanctuary of the divine instruction that the powers of the earth, to ensure themselves durability, must receive their consecration and their force. The Hermetic science of the early Christian ages, cultivated also by Geber, Alpharabius, and others of the Arabs, studied by the chiefs of the Templars, and embodied in certain symbols of the higher degrees of Freemasonry, may be accurately defined as the Kabbalah in active realization, or the magic of works. It has three analogous degrees: religious, philosophical, and physical realization. Its religious realization is the durable foundation of the true empire and the true priesthood that rule in the realm of human intellect. Its philosophical realization is the establishment of absolute doctrine, known in all times as the Holy Doctrine, and of which Plutarch, in the treatise De Icide et Osiride, speaks at large but mysteriously, and of a hierarchical instruction to secure the uninterrupted succession of adepts among the initiates. Its physical realization is the discovery and application, in the microcosm, or little world, of the creative law that incessantly peoples the great universe. Measure a corner of the creation, and multiply that space in proportional progression, and the entire infinite will multiply its circles filled with universes, which will pass in proportional segments between the ideal and elongating branches of your compass. Now suppose that from any point whatever of the infinite above you a hand holds another compass or a square, the lines of the celestial triangle will necessarily meet those of the compass of science, to form the mysterious Star of Solomon. All hypotheses scientifically probable are the last gleams of the twilight of knowledge, or its last shadows. Faith begins where reason sinks exhausted. Beyond the human reason is the divine reason, to our feebleness the great absurdity, the infinite absurd, which confounds us and which we believe. For the master, the compass of faith is above the square of reason. But both rest upon the holy scriptures and combine to form the blazing star of truth. All eyes do not see alike. Even the visible creation is not, for all who look upon it, of one form and one color. Our brain is a book printed within and without, and the two writings are, with all men, more or less confused. The primary tradition of the single revelation has been preserved under the name of the Kabbalah by the priesthood of Israel. The Kabbalistic doctrine, which was also the dogma of the Magi and of Hermes, is contained in the Sefer Yetzirah, the Sohar, and the Talmud. According to that doctrine, the absolute is the being, in which the word is, the word that is the utterance and expression of being and life. Magic is that which it is by itself, like the mathematics, for it is the exact and absolute science of nature and its laws. Magic is the science of the ancient Magi, and the Christian religion, which has imposed silence on the lying oracles, and put an end to the prestiges of the false gods. Itself reveres those Magi who came from the East, guided by a star, to adore the Savior of the world in his cradle. Tradition also gives these Magi the title of kings, because initiation into Magism constitutes a genuine royalty, and because the grand art of the Magi is styled by all the adepts, the royal art, or the holy realm or empire, sanctum regnum. The star which guided them is that same blazing star, the image whereof we find in all initiations. To the alchemists it is the sign of the quintessence, to the magists, the grand arcanum, to the Kabbalists, the sacred pentagram. The study of this pentagram could not but lead the Magi to the knowledge of the new name which was about to raise itself above all names, and cause all creatures capable of adoration to bend the knee. Magic unites in one and the same science whatsoever philosophy can possess that is most certain, and religion of the infallible and the eternal. It perfectly and incontestably reconciles these two terms that at first blush seem so opposed to each other: faith and reason, science and creed, authority and liberty. It supplies the human mind with an instrument of philosophical and religious certainty, exact as the mathematics, and accounting for the infallibility of the mathematics themselves. Thus there is an absolute in the matters of the intelligence and of faith. The supreme reason has not left the gleams of the human understanding to vacillate at hazard. There is an incontestable verity. There is an infallible method of knowing this verity, and by the knowledge of it, those who accept it as a rule may give their will a sovereign power that will make them the masters of all inferior things and of all errant spirits, that is to say, will make them the arbiters and kings of the world. Science has its nights and its dawns, because it gives the intellectual world a life which has its regulated movements and its progressive phases. It is with truths, as with the luminous rays, nothing of what is concealed is lost, but also, nothing of what is discovered is absolutely new. God has been pleased to give to science, which is the reflection of his glory, the seal of his eternity. It is not in the books of the philosophers, but in the religious symbolism of the ancients, that we must look for the footprints of science, and rediscover the mysteries of knowledge. The priests of Egypt knew, better than we do, the laws of movement and of life. They knew how to temper or intensify action by reaction, and readily foresaw the realization of these effects, the causes of which they had determined. The columns of Seth, Enoch, Solomon, and Hercules have symbolized in the Magian traditions this universal law of the equilibrium, and the science of the equilibrium or balancing of forces had led the initiates to that of the universal gravitation around the centers of life, heat, and light. Thales and Pythagoras learned in the sanctuaries of Egypt that the earth revolved around the sun, but they did not attempt to make this generally known, because to do so it would have been necessary to reveal one of the great secrets of the temple, that double law of attraction and radiation, or of sympathy and antipathy, of fixedness and movement, which is the principle of creation, and the perpetual cause of life. This truth was ridiculed by the Christian Lactantius, as it was long after sought to be proven a falsehood by persecution, by papal Rome. So the philosophers reasoned, while the priests, without replying to them or even smiling at their errors, wrote, in those hieroglyphics that created all dogmas and all poetry, the secrets of the truth. When truth comes into the world, the star of knowledge advises the Magi of it, and they hasten to adore the infant who creates the future. It is by means of the intelligence of the hierarchy and the practice of obedience that one obtains initiation. If the rulers have the divine right to govern, the true initiate will cheerfully obey. The orthodox traditions were carried from Chaldea by Abraham. They reigned in Egypt in the time of Joseph, together with the knowledge of the true God. Moses carried orthodoxy out of Egypt, and in the secret traditions of the Kabbalah we find a theology entire, perfect, unique, like that which in Christianity is most grand and best explained by the fathers and the doctors, the whole with a consistency and a harmoniousness which it is not as yet given to the world to comprehend. The Sohar, which is the key of the holy books, opens also all the depths and lights, all the obscurities of the ancient mythologies and of the sciences originally concealed in the sanctuaries. It is true that the secret of this key must be known, to enable one to make use of it, and that for even the most penetrating intellects, not initiated in this secret, the Sohar is absolutely incomprehensible and almost illegible. The secret of the occult sciences is that of nature itself, the secret of the generation of the angels and worlds, that of the omnipotence of God. Ye shall be like the Elohim, knowing good and evil, had the serpent of Genesis said, and the tree of knowledge became the tree of death. For 6,000 years the martyrs of knowledge toil and die at the foot of this tree, that it may again become the tree of life. The absolute sought for unsuccessfully by the insensate and found by the sages, is the truth, the reality, and the reason of the universal equilibrium. Equilibrium is the harmony that results from the analogy of contraries. Until now, humanity has been endeavoring to stand on one foot, sometimes on one, sometimes on the other. Civilizations have risen and perished, either by the anarchical insanity of despotism, or by the despotic anarchy of revolt. To organize anarchy is the problem which the revolutionists have and will eternally have to resolve. It is the rock of Sisyphus that will always fall back upon them. To exist a single instant, They are and always will be by fatality reduced to improvise a despotism without other reason of existence than necessity, and which, consequently, is violent and blind as necessity. We escape from the harmonious monarchy of reason, only to fall under the irregular dictatorship of folly. Sometimes superstitious enthusiasms, sometimes the miserable calculations of the materialist instinct have led astray the nations, and God at last urges the world on toward believing reason and reasonable beliefs. We have had prophets enough without philosophy, and philosophers without religion. The blind believers and the skeptics resemble each other, and are as far the one as the other from the eternal salvation. In the chaos of universal doubt and of the conflicts of reason and faith, the great men and seers have been but infirm and morbid artists, seeking the beau ideal at the risk and peril of their reason and life. Living only in the hope to be crowned, they are the first to do what Pythagoras in so touching a manner prohibits in his admirable symbols. They rend crowns, and tread them underfoot. Light is the equilibrium of shadow and lucidity. Movement is the equilibrium of inertia and activity. Authority is the equilibrium of liberty and power. Wisdom is equilibrium in the thoughts, which are the scintillations and rays of the intellect. Virtue is equilibrium in the affections. Beauty is harmonious proportion in forms. The beautiful lives are the accurate ones, and the magnificences of nature are an algebra of graces and splendors. Everything just is beautiful, everything beautiful ought to be just. There is, in fact, no nothing, no void emptiness, in the universe. From the upper or outer surface of our atmosphere to that of the sun, and to those of the planets and remote stars, in different directions, science has for hundreds of centuries imagined that there was simple, void, empty space. Comparing finite knowledge with the infinite, the philosophers know little more than the apes. In all that void space are the infinite forces of God, acting in an infinite variety of directions, back and forth, and never for an instant inactive. In all of it, active through the whole of its infinity, is the light that is the visible manifestation of God. The earth and every other planet and sphere that is not a center of light, carries its cone of shadow with it as it flies and flashes round in its orbit, but the darkness has no home in the universe. To illuminate the sphere on one side is to project a cone of darkness on the other. An error also is the shadow of the truth with which God illuminates the soul. In all that void, also, is the mysterious and ever-active electricity, and heat, and the omnipresent ether. At the will of God the invisible becomes visible. Two invisible gases, combined by the action of a force of God, and compressed, become and remain the water that fills the great basins of the seas, flows in the rivers and rivulets, leaps forth from the rocks or springs, drops upon the earth in rains, or whitens it with snows, and bridges the Danubes with ice, or gathers in vast reservoirs in the earth's bosom. God manifested fills all the extension that we foolishly call empty space and the void. And everywhere in the universe, what we call life and movement results from a continual conflict of forces or impulses. Whenever that active antagonism ceases, the immobility and inertia, which are death, result. If, says the Kabbalah, the justice of God, which is severity or the female, alone reigned, creation of imperfect beings such as man would from the beginning have been impossible, because sin being congenital with humanity, the infinite justice, measuring the sin by the infinity of the God offended against, must have annihilated humanity at the instant of its creation, and not only humanity but the angels, since these also, like all created by God and less than perfect, are sinful. Nothing imperfect would have been possible. If, on the other hand, the mercy or benignity of God, the male, were in no wise counteracted, sin would go unpunished, and the universe fall into a chaos of corruption. Let God but repeal a single principle or law of chemical attraction or sympathy, and the antagonistic forces equilibrated in matter, released from constraint, would instantaneously expand all that we term matter into impalpable and invisible gases, such as water or steam is, when confined in a cylinder and subjected to an immense degree of that mysterious force of the deity which we call heat. It is by its expansion released. Incessantly the great currents and rivers of air flow and rush and roll from the equator to the frozen polar regions, and back from these to the torrid equatorial realms. Necessarily incident to these great, immense, equilibrated and beneficent movements, caused by the antagonism of equatorial heat and polar cold, are the typhoons, tornadoes, and cyclones that result from conflicts between the rushing currents. These and the benign trade winds result from the same great law. God is omnipotent, but effects without causes are impossible, and these effects cannot but sometimes be evil. The fire would not warm, if it could not also burn, the human flesh. The most virulent poisons are the most sovereign remedies, when given in due proportion. The evil is the shadow of the good, and inseparable from it. The divine wisdom limits by equipoise the omnipotence of the divine will or power, and the result is beauty or harmony. The arch rests not on a single column, but springs from one on either side. So is it also with the divine justice and mercy, and with the human reason and human faith. That purely scholastic theology, issue of the categories of Aristotle and of the sentences of Peter Lombard, that logic of the syllogism which argues instead of reasoning, and finds a response to everything by subtilizing on terms, wholly ignored the Kabbalistic dogma and wandered off into the drear vacuity of darkness. It was less a philosophy or a wisdom than a philosophical automaton, replying by means of springs, and uncoiling its theses like a wheeled movement. It was not the human verb but the monotonous cry of a machine, the inanimate speech of an android. It was the fatal precision of mechanism, instead of a free application of rational necessities. St. Thomas Aquinas crushed with a single blow all this scaffolding of words built one upon the other, by proclaiming the eternal empire of reason, in that magnificent sentence, "A thing is not just because God wills it, but God wills it because it is just." The proximate consequence of this proposition, arguing from the greater to the less, was this: a thing is not true because Aristotle has said it, but Aristotle could not reasonably say it unless it was true. Seek then, first of all, the truth and justice, and the science of Aristotle will be given you in addition. It is the fine dream of the greatest of the poets, that hell, become useless, is to be closed at length by the aggrandizement of heaven, that the problem of evil is to receive its final solution, and good alone, necessary and triumphant, is to reign in eternity. So the Persian dogma taught that Ahriman and his subordinate ministers of evil were at last, by means of a redeemer and mediator, to be reconciled with deity, and all evil to end. But unfortunately, the philosopher forgets all the laws of equilibrium, and seeks to absorb the light in a splendor without shadow, and movement in an absolute repose that would be the cessation of life. So long as there shall be a visible light, there will be a shadow proportional to this light. And whatever is illuminated will cast its cone of shadow. Repose will never be happiness, if it is not balanced by an analogous and contrary movement. This is the immutable law of nature, the eternal will of the justice which is God. The same reason necessitates evil and sorrow in humanity which renders indispensable the bitterness of the waters of the seas. Here also, harmony can result only from the analogy of contraries, and what is above exists by reason of what is below. It is the depth that determines the height, and if the valleys are filled up, the mountains disappear. So, if the shadows are effaced, the light is annulled, which is only visible by the graduated contrast of gloom and splendor, and universal obscurity will be produced by an immense dazzling. Even the colors in the light only exist by the presence of the shadow. It is the threefold alliance of the day and night, the luminous image of the dogma, the light made shadow, as the Savior is the Logos made man, and all this reposes on the same law, the primary law of creation, the single and absolute law of nature, that of the distinction and harmonious ponderation of the contrary forces in the universal equipoise. The two great columns of the temple that symbolizes the universe are necessity, or the omnipotent will of God, which nothing can disobey, and liberty, or the free will of his creatures. Apparently, and to our human reason antagonistic, the same reason is not incapable of comprehending how they can be in equipoise. The infinite power and wisdom could so plan the universe and the infinite succession of things as to leave man free to act, and, foreseeing what each would at every instant think and do, to make of the free will and free action of each an instrument to aid in effecting its general purpose. For even a man, foreseeing that another will do a certain act, and in no wise controlling or even influencing him, may use that action as an instrument to effect his own purposes. The infinite wisdom of God foresees what each will do, and uses it as an instrument, by the exertion of his infinite power, which yet does not control the human action so as to annihilate its freedom. The result is harmony, the third column that upholds the lodge. The same harmony results from the equipoise of necessity and liberty. The will of God is not for an instant defeated nor thwarted. And this is the divine victory, and yet he does not tempt nor constrain men to do evil, and thus his infinite glory is unimpaired. The result is stability, cohesion, and permanence in the universe, and undivided dominion and autocracy in the deity. And these, victory, glory, stability, and dominion, are the last four Sephiroth of the Kabbalah. I am, God said to Moses, that which is, was, and shall forever be. But the very God, in his unmanifested essence, conceived of as not yet having created and as alone, has no name. Such was the doctrine of all the ancient sages, and it is so expressly declared in the Kabbalah. Is the name of the deity manifested in a single act, that of creation, and containing within himself, in idea and actuality, the whole universe, to be invested with form and be materially developed during the eternal succession of ages. As God never was not, so he never thought not. And the universe has no more had a beginning than the divine thought of which it is the utterance, no more than the deity himself. The duration of the universe is but a point halfway upon the infinite line of eternity, and God was not inert and uncreative during the eternity that stretches behind that point. The archetype of the universe did never not exist in the divine mind. The Word was in the beginning with God, and was God. And the ineffable name is that, not of the very essence but of the absolute, manifested as being or existence. For existence or being, said the philosophers, is limitation, and the very deity is not limited nor defined, but is all that may possibly be, besides all that is, was, and shall be. Reversing the letters of the ineffable name, and dividing it, it becomes bisexual, as the word Yud-He or Jar is, and discloses the meaning of much of the obscure language of the Kabbalah, and is the highest of which the columns Jachin and Boaz are the symbol. In the image of deity, we are told, God created the man. Male and female created he them. And the writer, symbolizing the divine by the human, then tells us that the woman, at first contained in the man, was taken from his side. So Minerva, goddess of wisdom, was born, a woman and in armor, of the brain of Jove. Isis was the sister before she was the wife of Osiris, and within Brahm, the source of all, the very god, without sex or name, was developed Maya, the mother of all that is. The Word is the first and only begotten of the Father, and the all with which the highest mysteries were regarded has imposed silence in respect to the nature of the Holy Spirit. The Word is light, and the life of humanity. It is for the adepts to understand the meaning of the symbols. Turn now, with us, to the degrees of the Blue Masonry, and for your last lesson, receive the explanation of one of their symbols. You see upon the altar of those degrees the square and the compass, and you remember how they lay upon the altar in each degree.
Y'all get on my damn nerve with that shit. I got 5 people watching and only 2 likes. How about y'all hit that like button, please? Dang.
Square is an instrument adapted for plane surfaces only, and therefore appropriate to geometry or measurement of the earth, which appears to be, and was by the ancients supposed to be, a plane. The compass is an instrument that has relation to spheres and spherical surfaces, and is adapted to spherical trigonometry, or that branch of mathematics which deals with the heavens and the orbits of the planetary bodies. The square, therefore, is a natural and appropriate symbol of this earth, and the things that belong to it, are of it, or concern it. The compass is an equally natural and appropriate symbol of the heavens, and of all celestial things and celestial natures. You see at the beginning of this reading, an old Hermetic symbol, copied from the Materia Prima of Valentinus, printed at Frankfurt in 1613, with a treatise entitled Azote. Upon it you see a triangle upon a square, both of these contained in a circle, and above this, standing upon a dragon, a human body, with 2 arms only, but 2 heads, one male and the other female. By the side of the male head is the sun, and by that of the female head, the moon, the crescent within the circle of the full moon. And the hand on the male side holds a compass, and that on the female side, a square. The heavens and the earth were personified as deities, even among the Aryan ancestors of the European nations of the Hindus, Zends, Bactrians, and Persians, and the Rig Veda Sanhita contains hymns addressed to them as gods. They were deified also among the Phoenicians, and among the Greeks Uranos and Gea, heaven and earth, were sung as the most ancient of the deities, by Hesiod. It is the great, fertile, beautiful Mother, Earth, that produces, with limitless profusion of beneficence, everything that ministers to the needs, to the comfort, and to the luxury of man. From her teeming and inexhaustible bosom come the fruits, the grain, the flowers, in their season. From it comes all that feeds the animals which serve man as laborers and for food. She, in the fair springtime, is green with abundant grass, and the trees spring from her soil, and from her teeming vitality take their wealth of green leaves. In her womb are found the useful and valuable minerals, hers are the seas that swarm with life, hers the rivers that furnish food and irrigation, and the mountains that send down the streams which swell into these rivers, hers the forests that feed the sacred fires for the sacrifices, and blaze upon the domestic hearths. The earth, therefore, the great producer, was always represented as a female, as the mother, great, bounteous, beneficent Mother Earth. On the other hand, it is the light and heat of the sun in the heavens, and the rains that seem to come from them, that in the springtime make fruitful this bountifully producing earth, that restore life and warmth to her veins, chilled by winter, set running free her streams, and beget, as it were, that greenness and that abundance of which she is so prolific. As the procreative and generative agents, the heavens and the sun have always been regarded as male, as the generators that fructify the earth and cause it to produce. The hermaphroditic figure is the symbol of the double nature anciently assigned to the deity, as generator and producer, as Brahm and Maya among the Aryans, Osiris and Isis among the Egyptians. As the sun was male, so the moon was female, and Isis was both the sister and the wife of Osiris. The compass, therefore, is the hermetic symbol of the creative deity, and the square of the productive earth or universe. From the heavens come the spiritual and immortal portion of man. From the earth his material and mortal portion. The Hebrew Genesis says that Yahuwah formed man of the dust of the earth, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Through the 7 planetary spheres, represented by the mystic ladder of the Mithriac initiations, and it by that which Jacob saw in his dream, not with 3, but with 7 steps, the souls, emanating from the deity, descended, to be united to their human bodies, and through those 7 spheres they must reascend, to return to their origin and home in the bosom of the deity. The compass, therefore, as the symbol of the heavens, represents the spiritual, intellectual, and moral portion of this double nature of humanity, and the square, as the symbol of the earth, its material, sensual, and baser portion. Truth and intelligence, said one of the ancient Indian sects of philosophers, are the eternal attributes of God, not of the individual soul, which is susceptible both of knowledge and ignorance, of pleasure and pain. Therefore God and the individual soul are distinct, and this expression of the ancient Naya philosophers, in regard to truth, has been handed down to us through the long succession of ages, in the lessons of Freemasonry, wherein we read, that truth is a divine attribute, and the foundation of every virtue. While embodied in matter, they said, the soul is in a state of imprisonment, and is under the influence of evil passions, but having, by intense study, arrived at the knowledge of the elements and principles of nature, it attains unto the place of the eternal, in which state of happiness, its individuality does not cease. Vitality which animates the mortal frame. The breath of life of the Hebrew Genesis, the Hindu philosophers in general held, perishes with it, but the soul is divine, all emanation of the Spirit of God, but not a portion of that Spirit. For they compared it to the heat and light sent forth from the sun, or to a ray of that light, which neither lessens nor divides its own essence. However created, or invested with separate existence, the soul, which is but the creature of the deity, cannot know the mode of its creation, nor comprehend its own individuality. It cannot even comprehend how the being which it and the body constitute can feel pain, or see, or hear. It has pleased the universal Creator to set bounds to the scope of our human and finite reason, beyond which it cannot reach, and if we are capable of comprehending the mode and manner of the creation or generation of the universe of things, he has been pleased to conceal it from us by an impenetrable veil, while the words used to express the act have no other definite meaning than that he caused that universe to commence to exist. It is enough for us to know, what Masonry teaches, that we are not all mortal, that the soul or spirit, the intellectual and reasoning portion of ourself, is our very self, is not subject to decay and dissolution, but is simple and immaterial, survives the death of the body, and is capable of immortality, that it is also capable of improvement and advancement, of increase of knowledge of the things that are divine, of becoming wiser and better, and more worthy of immortality, and that to become so, and to help to improve and benefit others and all our race, is the noblest ambition and highest glory that we can entertain and attain unto, in this momentary and imperfect life. In every human being the divine and the human are intermingled. In every one there are the reason and the moral sense, the passions that prompt to evil, and the sensual appetites. If ye live after the flesh, ye shall die, said Paul, writing to the Christians at Rome, but if ye through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, ye shall live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. The flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, he said, writing to the Christians of Galatia, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. That which I do not willingly do, he wrote to the Romans, for what I wish to do, that I do not do, but that which I hate I do. It is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. To will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good, I find not. For I do not do the good that I desire to do, and the evil that I do not wish to do.
That's that inner conflict.
that I do. Find then a law, that when I desire to do good, evil is present with me, for I delight in the law of God after the inward man. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. So then, with the mind I myself serve the law of God, but with the flesh the law of sin. Life is a battle, and to fight that battle heroically and well is the great purpose of every man's existence, who is worthy and fit to live at all. To stem the strong currents of adversity, to advance in despite of all obstacles, to snatch victory from the jealous grasp of fortune, to become a chief and a leader among men, to rise to rank and power by eloquence. Courage, perseverance, study, energy, activity, discouraged by no reverses, impatient of no delays, deterred by no hazards, to win wealth, to subjugate men by our intellect, the very elements by our audacity, to succeed, to prosper, to thrive. Thus it is, according to the general understanding, that one fights well the battle of life. Even to succeed in business by that boldness which halts for no risks, that audacity which stakes all upon hazardous chances, by the shrewdness of the close dealer, the boldness of the unscrupulous operator, ever by the knaveries of the stock board and the gold room, to crawl up into place by disreputable means or the votes of brutal ignorance, these also are deemed to be among the great successes of life. But that which is the greatest battle, and in which the truest honor and most real success are to be won, is that which our intellect and reason and moral sense, our spiritual natures, fight against our sensual appetites and evil passions, our earthly and material or animal nature. Therein only are the true glories of heroism to be won, there only the successes that entitle us to triumphs. In every human life that battle is fought, and those who win elsewhere often suffer ignominious defeat and disastrous rout, and discomfiture and shameful downfall in this encounter. You have heard more than one definition of Freemasonry. The truest and the most significant you have yet to hear. It is taught to the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and the master, and it is taught in every degree through which you have advanced to this. It is a definition of what Freemasonry is, of what its purposes and its very essence and spirit are, and it has for every one of us the force and sanctity of a divine law, and imposes on every one of us a solemn obligation. It is symbolized and taught to the apprentice as well as to you by the compass and the square, upon which, as well as upon the book of your religion and the book of the law of the Scottish Freemasonry, you have taken so many obligations. As a knight, you have been taught it by the swords, the symbols of honor and duty, on which you have taken your vows. It was taught you by the balance, the symbol of all equilibrium, and by the cross, the symbol of devotedness and self-sacrifice. But all that these teach and contain is taught and contained, for entered apprentice, knight, and prince alike, by the compass and the square. For the apprentice, the points of the compass are beneath the square. For the fellow craft, one is above and one beneath. For the master, both are dominant and have rule, control, and empire over the symbol of the earthly and the material. Freemasonry is the subjugation of the human that is in man by the divine, the conquest of the appetites and passions by the moral sense and the reason, a continual effort, struggle, and warfare of the spiritual against the material and sensual. That victory, when it has been achieved and secured, and the conqueror may rest upon his shield and wear the well-earned laurels, is the true holy empire. To achieve it, the Mason must first attain a solid conviction, founded upon reason, that he hath within him a spiritual nature, a soul that is not to die when the body is dissolved, but is to continue to exist and to advance toward perfection through all the ages of eternity, and to see more and more clearly, as it draws nearer unto God, the light of the divine presence. This the philosophy of the ancient and accepted right teaches him, and it encourages him to persevere by helping him to believe that his free will is entirely consistent with God's omnipotence and omniscience, that he is not only infinite in power and of infinite wisdom, but of infinite mercy and an infinitely tender pity and love for the frail and imperfect creatures that he has made. Every degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, from the 1st to the 32nd, teaches by its ceremonial as well as by its instruction, that the noblest purpose of life and the highest duty of a man are to strive incessantly and vigorously to win the mastery of everything, of that which in him is spiritual and divine, over that which is material and sensual. So that in him also, as in the universe which God governs, harmony and beauty may be the result of a just equilibrium. You have been taught this in those degrees, conferred in the Lodge of Perfection, which inculcate particularly the practical morality of Freemasonry. to be true under whatever temptation to be false, to be honest in all your dealings, even if great losses should be the consequence, to be charitable when selfishness would prompt you to close your hand, and deprivation of luxury or comfort must follow the charitable act, to judge justly and impartially, even in your own case, when baser impulses prompt you to do an injustice in order that you may be benefited or justified, to be tolerant when passion prompts to intolerance and persecution, to do that which is right, when the wrong seems to promise larger profit, and to wrong no man of anything that is his, however easy it may seem so to enrich yourself. In all these things and others which you promised in those degrees, your spiritual nature is taught and encouraged to assert its rightful dominion over your appetites and passions. The philosophical degrees have taught you the value of knowledge, the excellence of truth, the superiority of intellectual labor, the dignity and value of your soul, the worth of great and noble thoughts, and thus endeavored to assist you to rise above the level of the animal appetites and passions, the pursuits of greed and the miserable struggles of ambition, and to find purer pleasure and nobler prizes and rewards in the acquisition of knowledge, the enlargement of the intellect, the interpretation of the sacred writing of God upon the great pages of the book of nature. And the chivalric degrees have led you on the same path, by showing you the excellence of generosity, clemency, forgiveness of injuries, magnanimity, contempt of danger, and the paramount obligations of duty and honor. They have taught you to overcome the fear of death, to devote yourself to the great cause of civil and religious liberty, to be the soldier of all that is just right and true, in the midst of pestilence to deserve your title of Knight Commander of the Temple, and neither there nor elsewhere to desert your post and flee dastard-like from the foe. In all this, you assert the superiority and right to dominion of that in you which is spiritual and divine. No base fear of danger or death, no sordid ambitions or pitiful greeds or base considerations can tempt a true Scottish knight to dishonor, and so make his intellect, his reason, his soul, the bond slave of his appetites, of his passions, of that which is material and animal, selfish and brutish in his nature. It is not possible to create a true and genuine brotherhood upon any theory of the baseness of human nature, nor by a community of belief in abstract propositions as to the nature of the deity, the number of his persons, or other theorems of religious faith, nor by the establishment of a system of association simply for mutual relief, and by which, in consideration of certain payments regularly.
I had saw it. I was just busy. What's going on? But y'all be killing me. Y'all be in the clouds watching the shit. You won't even hit the damn like button. Nothing. Won't even comment. How the hell I supposed to ever get in the damn algorithm if y'all won't damn hit the damn like button? Y'all support everybody else, and they with their bullshit. I be trying to bring y'all some damn knowledge, and y'all won't even damn support me. That's why I ain't really been recording like I used to record. I said, fuck that shit. I ain't got time.
Each becomes entitled to a certain stipend in case of sickness, to attention then, and to the ceremonies of burial after death. There can be no genuine brotherhood without mutual regard, good opinion and esteem, mutual charity, and mutual allowance for faults and failings. It is those only who learn habitually to think better of each other, to look habitually for the good that is in each other, and expect, allow for, and overlook the evil, who can be brethren one of the other, in any true sense of the word. Those who gloat over the failings of one another, who think each other to be naturally base and low, of a nature in which the evil predominates and excellence is not to be looked for, cannot be even friends, and much less brethren. No one can have a right to think meanly of his race, unless he also thinks meanly of himself. If, from a single fault or error, he judges of the character of another, and takes the single act as evidence of the whole nature of the man and of the whole course of his life, he ought to consent to be judged by the same rule, and to admit it to be right that others should thus uncharitably condemn himself. But such judgments will become impossible when he incessantly reminds himself that in every man who lives there is an immortal soul endeavoring to do that which is right and just, a ray, however small, and almost inappreciable, from the great source of light and intelligence, which ever struggles upward amid all the impediments of sense and the obstructions of the passions, and that in every man this ray continually wages war against his evil passions and his unruly appetites, or, if it has succumbed, is never wholly extinguished and annihilated. For he will then see that it is not victory, but the struggle that deserves honor, since in this as in all else no man can always command success. Amid a cloud of errors, of failure and shortcomings, he will look for the struggling soul, for that which is good in every one amid the evil, and believing that each is better than from his acts and omissions he seems to be, and that God cares for him still, and pities him and loves him, he will feel that even the erring sinner is
Hey, what's going on, baby girl? Like I said, that's why I really ain't been recording like I used to. This shit costs money. Internet costs money. Power costs money. You know what I'm saying? The universe been providing because something always comes through for me. Like I said, tell everybody I'm waiting on my damn little money and shit. But sometimes, like I say, something always comes through. That's why I really don't worry. But I'm not gonna keep on wasting my time and my energy trying to help people, and y'all ain't even trying to damn help me. Or you could hit the damn like button. But that's the least you could damn do.
His brother, still entitled to his sympathy, and bound to him by the indissoluble ties of fellowship. If there be nothing of the divine in man, what is he, after all, but a more intelligent animal? He hath no fault nor vice which some beast hath not, and therefore in his vices he is but a beast of a higher order, and he hath hardly any moral excellence, perhaps none, which some animal hath not in as
Y'all motherfuckers in the clouds listening, but are y'all applying what you're listening, what you're hearing? Are you applying it? Because if you was applying it, then you wouldn't be acting the way you're acting. You wouldn't be so damn selfish and shit. Because that's what I'll tell you a lot. That's what I found out about YouTube. A bunch of selfish motherfuckers on here. That's what it is. Everybody out for self. That's why I quit supporting a lot of y'all motherfuckers.
a degree, even the more excellent of these, such as generosity, fidelity, and magnanimity. Bardisan, the Syrian Christian, in his book of the Laws of Countries, says of men that in the things belonging to their bodies, they maintain their nature like animals, and in the things which belong to their minds, they do that which they wish, as being free and with power, and as the likeness of God. And Melaton, Bishop of Sardis, in his oration to Antoninus Caesar, says, let him, the ever-living God, be always present in thy mind, for thy mind itself is his likeness, for it, too, is invisible and impalpable, and without form.
Y'all can't handle the motherfucking truth, can you? Like, I already be knowing y'all be even though the ticker be saying one thing, I still know it be more listening than what the ticker say. And then see y'all tell on your damn self, as soon as I start talking shit, y'all drop out. You know, like, I give a damn. That's y'all dumbasses. Now people to be trying to bring y'all some informative information, something that's going to enlighten you and empower you, because knowledge is power. Y'all won't support us, but people to be out there with that bullshit, stirring up shit, talking about people and all that shit. Y'all support them kind of people, see? Send them money and all that shit. Because y'all some ignorant damn niggas, that's why. See, I speak my truth. I don't give a damn what nobody think. Because ain't none of y'all putting no food on my table or paying none of my bills. And if you don't like it, say something. Type it in the chat. But y'all too scared to do that, see, because y'all don't want nobody to know y'all be listening. Although I be knowing you be listening. Because I keep telling y'all don't understand energy. That's how energy works. Anyway, I'm out of here. Go within so